Toward the very beginning of the Bible, Noah was told to construct an ark in order to house every type of bird and all members of the animal kingdom. The Ramban explains that seemingly this was an impossible task. By example, he comments, there's a single bird which is called an ayah that has over 100 varieties, all of which were found in Noah's Ark. And one could imagine the enormous work, effort, and size of this ark in order to house all the animals that entered. The Ramban comments that this was absolutely impossible. Even if the ark was 10 times its size, it could not have housed all the animals that entered. In order to explain indeed how this happened, the Ramban writes a very simple answer, that this was miraculous. This wasn't natural, but this was an absolute miracle. But if so, he asks a very profound question. If this was a miraculous occurrence, why is it then that Noah had to work so hard? Our tradition tells us that Noah labored for over a century in order to construct this ark. And indeed, the miracle would have been even more pronounced had the ark been a small boat, in which case the enormity of the miracle would have been more obvious. And if so, why exactly was it necessary to labor over a century in order simply to be the recipient of a miracle? The answer is profound, but yet very simple. That miracles do not simply occur in a vacuum, but rather one is obligated to position themselves. That positioning is critical. If Noah would not have labored for over a century to build the largest ark that he could, this miracle would not necessarily have happened. It is only when a person exerts enormous effort and energy that then you turn to God through prayer because you've positioned yourself to be able to receive divine providence. And this is not only true of miracles, but rather this is true of the essence of life itself. We're called upon to be able to approach God in two very different veins. First, creatively, to exert effort and energy, but to realize, even though that's necessary, that certainly is not sufficient. One ultimately has to recognize that everything is a result of divine providence. Everything is a result of God's hand. And therefore, effort is necessary, but that has to be accompanied by prayer as well. It is part of our absolute belief, as Rabbi Akiva taught us, that kol ma da'avad Rachmana l'tava avad. All that God does is for the good. God is not merely omnipotent and omniscient, but also omnibenevolent. And the fact that we don't see it is because our vision is from such a limited perspective. It's hard for us to see things in real time. But as Passover teaches us, retrospectively, it is easier to see how each piece fits. And therefore, part of our belief is simply in the goodness of God, and that all indeed that he does ultimately, we will be able to perceive, is for the best. When one struggles in real time, no doubt it's difficult. And one has to take a step back and engage in introspection. This has to be impactful. That how is it that I can exert energy and effort, not merely creatively to service those who are in need, but simply to take a step back and to ask yourself that, how can I recognize the most important priorities of life? It's necessary at times to be able to realize that tragedy is also an opportunity for introspection, for redirection, and to return to the mandates of the Almighty. There is a stunning verse in the book of Micha that tells us, Ki nafalti, kamti. Although I have fallen, I will rise. Ki eshev b'choshech, Hashem orli. Although I sit in darkness, but ultimately, the light of God will shine upon me. In our sages, a Medrash Tehillim add an incredible dimension to this verse. It doesn't simply tell us that when I fall, I will rise. When I sit in darkness, ultimately I'll experience light, but something far more profound. Ilmole nafalti, lo kamti. If not for the fact that I have fallen, I wouldn't have the capacity, the ability to rise. If I wouldn't experience darkness, I wouldn't be able to appreciate divine light. And therefore, our sages tell us we have to recognize that exile is a precondition for salvation. Suffering is a precondition for celebration. And this, no doubt, is our mindset in the most dire times. We recognize that at times it's necessary to experience suffering, to endure tragedy, in order to properly position ourselves to be able to experience salvation and celebration. It is our hope, it is our prayer that these very difficult times, times of exile, times of suffering, will be transformed into times of abundant celebration, times of ultimate salvation. Bimhera v'yameinu, speedily in our times.